All right. My name is Chris Goettl. For those of you joining for the first time, welcome. This is our regular webinar. For those of you returning again, great to see you all again. And I'm joined here today by Todd Shell. Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Chris.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to get started. We're going to go through a little bit of an overview of what all released yesterday, and then we're going to jump into some recent news. And there's a lot of interesting things going on, somewhat related to today, some just general security kind of awareness that we're going to bring up. But we'll go ahead and make sure that we get through all of that. And then Todd is going to walk us through the bulletin releases for yesterday and also talk about some known issues and other things that we're aware of that are going on. So starting off with just a quick overview, Microsoft did have roughly 9 bulletins. It depends on how you're counting bulletins nowadays, but we count those as kind of like groupings of, here's all the downloads for one specific set of KVs. So like Windows 11 is one bulletin, Windows 10 and the related server branches are another bulletin, that sort of thing. So for those of you familiar with how we describe those, 8 of those had critical CVEs relating to them. One of them only had important or lower. Mozilla also released their updates yesterday for Firefox and Firefox ESR. The Adobe did have some updates they released later in the day, and that did include some updates for a variety of different products. The Adobe Reader and Acrobat update was non-security. That was the one thing that was kind of different with all of those. So that tends to be the one that most commonly gets tracked. The other ones don't get tracked as commonly, but we are going to talk about some recent news, especially as it regards in regards to Cold Fusion. So stay tuned for that in just a moment here. All right. So starting off with a little bit of kind of broader news perspective, there's definitely a lot going on across the industry. Here, for those of you not familiar, you're going to see I'm going to start to share a second screen. And when that happens, you're going to have multiple windows in your On24 experience. When that happens, you're going to be able to resize your windows there. So go ahead and tune into the shared screen that I've got there, because that's where we're going to talk about some of the news articles here. We'll come back to the slides in just a little bit. Again, once we get the slides there in the download, you should be able to download all of the content and be able to follow along with that too. But you'll get the PDF version of this, so you'll have access to all these links afterwards as well. The first one, many of you have heard about Silicon Valley Bank and the situation that's going on there. This is creating an opportunity, and several cybersecurity experts are drawing awareness to this because there are already scams and targeted kind of content trying to prey on people's paranoia and concern about this major event going on. Make sure that you make people aware that this is going to be a tactic that's going to be used by a variety of threat actors here for a while. So they're already kind of focusing on scams targeting people that are affected or making people feel like they might be affected and making them try to click on links. So, specifics around what exactly those scams are doing, not exactly sure yet in a lot of those cases, but there's already phishing content out there that is using that. So just be aware of that. If you haven't already had kind of a notification within your organization that relates to this may be something that your security team might want to give people a heads up. Be cautious of SVB related content right now, because it is a very hot topic and people are going to be not thinking before they click. So it's a high topic or a high profile area that scammers will use. So that's the first article. Not too much beyond that, just it's going to be used for phishing. The second one, there's a couple of links here. A couple of days ago, there were some updates around a 0-day exploit that could be affecting as many as 280 different blockchain technologies out there in the market, including many of the crypto firms. Now there is a confirmed attack that has happened, resulting in a $200 million loss. And this may not be the end of it here as well. The exploit is in those types of cryptocurrency, the blockchain technology used by cryptocurrency, but a variety of other technologies as well. So this is definitely some news that's going around at the moment. Again, not much that any of us can do about that unless we are specifically in an organization that is using a blockchain technology. If that's the case, your development org should be looking into how to update and plug those types of vulnerabilities that may exist within that technology. So news there, if your if your company does utilize some type of blockchain technology, you may need to investigate. For most of us, it's just more of an awareness of, if you're using a technology that does rely on blockchain, there may be updates that you need to worry about for that technology. Most of them may be cloud-based, but again, just kind of more awareness there. The second link here is also kind of going into the broader news about that came out on the 14th. Next one here is some more chat or generative AI related news, but there is some chat GPT powered polymorphic malware that has been confirmed to be able to bypass endpoint detection filters. So again, this is just kind of more of a Pandora's box has been opened. We've got to be aware of some of the risks of this and keep up on some of the news around that. So this is just a news article that some of you may want to be aware of, but they're using ChatGPT to basically create Python scripts that can be used in a variety of different types of attacks. And in that case, using that to create kind of polymorphic malware makes it so they can try to bypass protections that might be in place there. So just be aware. That's kind of a continuing topic that's going to be expanding in the market, how it's going to be used for good or bad. So again, not immediate actions for most of us, but things to be aware of. Adobe, they have warned of some limited attacks exploiting a vulnerability in Cold Fusion. So that Cold Fusion 0 day, this is something that some of you may have in your environment and may need to take a look at. So if you are running Cold Fusion, be aware that this vulnerability exists within there, CVE 2023-26360. And basically it goes back to versions 2021 and 2018. Again, the attacks are limited, kind of targeted attacks there. Most of the time, Adobe kind of splits things into two groupings. They've got like Adobe Reader and Flash used to be in this group as well. That's the ones that people need to keep up with regularly. As soon as a security update's out, make sure to get on it right away. The rest of the Adobe portfolio tends to be less distributed across environments. So threat actors don't take advantage of vulnerabilities as often. But as we can see here, it does happen. So the update, they did release updates for pretty much all of the less targeted systems, 106 vulnerabilities in that lineup that they had, but one of them happens to be this Cold Fusion update. So make sure to take a look at that if you are running a variety of the Adobe products, especially Cold Fusion this month. That one you want to get on right away. And for those of you running 40 OS, there is a 0 day being used right now to attack government networks. So for any of you who might be running the 40 OS, for any Fortinet products that are out there, there is a vulnerability that was actually a 2022 vulnerability, CVE 2022-41328. So make sure that if you are running any of these versions of FortiOS in your organization, that you're getting updates prioritized for that, especially if you're in the government vertical. That is the groups that are being most targeted there. But even if you're not on the government side, if you are using this, make sure to get those prioritized so you're staying ahead of those attacks. But there's some details down here talking about their SSL VPN. It was patched back in December 2022. There's the tracking number for it, CVE ID, and details about that, how to update the firmware for that. But again, just make sure you're staying on top of those types of updates. Okay, getting into Windows 11 is pushing some pretty big updates this month. Windows 11 Moment 2 features update is releasing in this month's OS update. So that's going to include new things like the new search box and AI-powered Bing, phone link for iOS, enhanced touchscreen experience, major upgrades to Notepad. They're making major updates to Notepad. That's kind of what it's pretty basic, right? I mean, there's how much can you update to Notepad, but we'll see.
It's turning into Word. Come on, Chris. You know.
Notepad becomes WordPad. Wait a second. So they just transit. Yeah, that's a good point, Todd. But yeah, there's definitely some big updates coming there. This may be challenging for some of your organizations, as some of these feature updates may be introducing things that you don't want in the experience for your users. If that is the case, we have also included a link to this tech blogger is one who tends to do a lot of things around how do you lock down, put policies in place and things to control some of these features from getting out to your organization. So if you're interested in how to block that, the Windows 11 Moments new features being added, there is a way to do that. You have to get at least one machine updated to the version that has it, and then you have the settings in there now where you can start to create a group policy to go and push out to the rest of your machines. So that may be something that you need to jump on pretty quickly if you want to do that. Several people on patchmanagement.org are targeting trying to put that in place, but that's definitely one where you'll want to take a look at that link. So the out of office hours blog, I guess you could call it, that Michael Niehaus rambles on different technology topics. He's got a pretty good write-up on how to do GPO based, and also if you're using MDM, there's MDM policy settings for allow temporary enterprise feature control to be able to lock that down and turn it off. So a good article there that's been distributed on patchmanagement.org. If you haven't already seen it there, we'll share that out here. Actually, thank you for posting that question. That gives me the ability to go and send a response to all with the link to that article. So again, apologies that the PDF's not available in the download right now. But if you look at the Q&A, you should now see a response that I just sent out to everybody that has that link. Okay. That should cover the Windows 11 Moments update. All right, getting into, we've got 2 zero-day vulnerabilities this month, 2 known exploits. The first one is a vulnerability in Windows Smart Screen that could allow security feature bypass. We actually saw one of these not too long ago, this last year, and it was one where basically the attacker could craft a malicious file that can evade the mark of the web defenses. So this is basically, if you're familiar with Internet Zone tagging on content that comes through, it's taking advantage of a loophole in that where they can basically flag it so it looks like it's not coming from the internet. It's coming from a zone that's more trusted and able to bypass that. What this means then is things like the protected view in Microsoft Office and other areas there that rely on that mark of the web tagging could be bypassed to introduce malicious content to the user without those protections in place. So on this one, the CVSS, the one thing I want to make sure people catch on this one is Microsoft only rated this as moderate. The CVSS score is quite low on this, 5.4 in this case. Most of you, depending on how you're prioritizing, this CVE would fall well below your radar of concern. Ignore that for a moment. Focus on the fact that it's actively being exploited. This is definitely prioritizing your OS updates this month as a bit more urgent. It's not necessarily being widely distributed right now, but it is being attacked in the wild. Typically, it only takes a little bit longer for this to get into a little bit more mainstream kind of distribution. But there's functioning code available to threat actors showing how to take advantage of this. Okay, so Jenna said that the slides should be showing up now. If you're still not seeing them, refresh, and they should be showing up in your content tray in On24. And apologies for that. The On24 platform has a little bit of a lag time. By the time I get Jenna the slides, she gets them uploaded there, and then if we get to it in time, it becomes available by the time our live event goes out. But apologies on that. It's always a time crunch to get everything in there just in time to make it show up. So refresh if you're not seeing it, and you should get access to those now. Cool. Got a confirmation that people are getting it now. Thank you.
Hey, Chris,
Okay.
one last
Go ahead,
comment
John.
on this one while you're there. When I was reading through the particular CVE info on Microsoft's webpage yesterday, they did say that they're considering doing an update for this on some of the older operating systems too. You'll notice on there that has the Windows 10 through the current server version. So
Yep.
we may see either a out-of-band release on this or maybe just something next month. We'll see.
Yeah, and usually when Microsoft starts to consider that, that means it's concerning enough that they're going to take the time to go back to older platforms and do that. They pretty rarely do that. So if they're even considering that, it sounds like it's going broader than just targeted attacks. So they'll use language like limited or targeted attacks when they start to look at things going back into older versions of the platform. That's when it's getting to the point where it's broader distribution. Now, a vulnerability like this does require them to convince a user to click on something. We all know that's not that hard. That's a statistical challenge, not a real barrier to attackers being able to use this. This vulnerability itself can't give them everything they need, but attack chaining is how they're going to take this as kind of a first step. So consider this. This vulnerability is used to get past the first layer of defense, get the user to click on something that exploits another vulnerability that does a privilege escalation, gets them to a level where they can execute a third vulnerability that basically lets them own the system. Attack chains of 2 to 4 CVEs are not uncommon nowadays. There's many examples of how threat actors are using attack chains like that. And a vulnerability like this, that's only a moderate or an important, becomes a critical piece of a 2 to 3, maybe even 4 CVE chain of steps that are going to execute very quickly and really give the attacker full control over that system in a very short period of time. And it all comes back to targeting that user again. So do take this one seriously. Ignore the moderate, ignore the 5.4 CVSS score. Make sure your OS updates get prioritized this month. The second exploited vulnerability this month is in the Windows Outlook and Microsoft 365 apps side. It's an elevation of privilege vulnerability. Let me switch over to that one. This one, rated as critical, CVSS score of 9.8. This one's definitely a bit nastier. Also has functional code maturity. The thing about this one is it's able to be targeted over your network. No privileges or user action is required for this to be able to be executed. It requires NTLM to do this. So for those of you still relying on NTLM, that's where this vulnerability is taking advantage of things. What it's able to do, though, is the attacker basically just has to send an email that's targeting this vulnerability. And before they actually have it down here in the notes, I think. Yes, this could lead to exploitation before the email even shows up in the user's preview pane. So again, all they have to do is send this email, and if the vulnerability is exposed, they can take advantage of it. So this one, that's why it's a 9.8 and a bit nastier to do that. So Microsoft has provided a couple of mitigating options for this particular vulnerability. The first one, probably the harder one, adding users to the protected users security group, which prevents the use of NTLM as an authentication mechanism. This is the one where if you still have applications relying on NTLM, it's going to be hard to implement that. So you probably know if you've got something NTLM based yet, but that's kind of the key to that first mitigation option. The second one, blocking TCP 445 SMB outbound from your network perimeter or firewall. You can also do this at your VPN settings. But basically, the way that the attacker takes advantage of this, they have to set up the attack, and that attack is going to basically call them out to a UNC location that the attacker controls. So that's going to typically be something outside of your network. The email goes in, basically redirects to go out to that UNC location, and that is going to then try to capture that hash and then start talking to other services and basically do a pass the hash attack to authenticate as that user to another service within your organization. So this one is particularly nasty, and you're going to want to make sure the CVE on this one, 2023-23397, I think that was the question there about from Carnell about which CVE was this one. The other thing to keep in mind is there are a variety of different editions that are affected by this. Outlook, 2013 through 2019, Microsoft 365 apps, which are click-to-run applications. Most of those, you probably have it automatically getting the latest. If you don't, if you're controlling the update of that, remember that you've got to go and update your click-to-run, local repository so that when people click on that, it's going to know to look to your, local network location for your click-to-run app and update it from there. If you've done that, you know it. But that's how you make sure to update that, is make sure you've done actually updated your click-to-run location that you're hosting. It's not a common configuration. Most people using the click-to-run apps are getting it live from Microsoft. So if everything's working correctly, the next time they click to run that, it should get the latest version of it. Okay. The additional mitigations that they've provided, they also have this section down here in the Q&A or the FAQ section. It talks a bit more about mitigating past the hash attacks in general. So there's additional content you can go and take a look at there. That's just a general defense in depth. That plus this security update gives you a better overall protection. But really, the two mitigation steps up above here are the two that you want to look into for this, and getting the Microsoft Office applications up to date. Okay, I think we're down into the publicly disclosed now. So this is an older CVE that was not re-released, but basically updated to expand to more operating systems. There's a couple of comments coming in. Click to run admins can push this out to workstations. It will force close any open office applications. Yep. So if you're familiar with how to do that, there is basically a command that you can do to run that. I can't copy and paste it out of there, but basically you push down a command that forces the click to run app to update. So it's just a /update command switch that you put on that. Instead of running and opening, it forces the update to happen. So that's another way to do it. So thank you, Patrick, for that. We'll see if we can get that copied into the clipboard to share out. But On24 makes it hard to reshare things like that coming in, probably for security reasons. But all right. So this open source remote code execution vulnerability, if you remember this one, it came in earlier in February. If I remember correctly, sorry if you're getting vertigo from me scrolling so fast, down here at the bottom, you can see what Microsoft updated here in March. The CVE was updated to add Windows software. As Microsoft is aware, certain versions of Windows are affected by the CURL vulnerability. So that new open source library that addresses this issue will be addressing it in an upcoming security release. So you can see the list right now. They are going to be updating this in several Windows editions. Those updates are not there yet. They're just warning you that this will be coming. So it's mostly informational this month. Public disclosure, the fact that Microsoft is taking more steps to include this in there, just makes it they're doing a better job of actually plugging this one, so you don't have to go and do some additional steps outside of their products since they're incorporating it. The last one here is around Microsoft Exchange. Again, this was the update that released first in February. March 9th did have an additional update. The update in this case was to re-release the security update. This one is actually a re-release. The re-release is addressing performance issues that were happening in a narrow group of organizations. They were pretty specific that it was a limited number of companies that were being hit by this, or the performance issues. But the update here is that they re-released it to address some of those install and performance issues that were happening. Yeah, here it is. A small subset of customers were experiencing problems with Exchange Web Services due to the February update. This new update addresses those problems. So if you were having those performance issues, definitely this is the thing that you want to get to put that in place. There's no changes to the security fixes that were put in there from last month. It's more just a performance change. All right, so that wraps up the new related news there. Todd, were there any questions that came in that we want to address before we jump into the rest?
No, I think we covered most of them there, Chris, as they were coming in. So
okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my other screen, and you'll be able to go back to just the slide content, so you can expand that part of your screen again if you shrank it down before. Servicing stack updates. There are some servicing stack updates this month. We do have reports already of people, especially on the 2012 platform, I think it was, right, Todd?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so most of the time before, SSUs were not like triggering an update when you push that update. In this case, the 2012 SSU this month is triggering updates, where several people have reported that. So be aware if you were pushing out the SSUs in advance of regular patching without a reboot. In this case, the 2012 platform could be adversely affected by that and trigger a reboot anyway. 2012 is the only one that we saw reports for, but just be cautious of that this month if you're pushing those out aggressively. Server 2012, speaking of which, the end of life, again, is coming October this year. If you haven't already, you should be having budgeting conversations, project planning to see, when and how you phase it all out. Or if you're going to be completely done with it on time, just make sure that you've got visibility into how many are remaining and that you're on track to get those retired before the end of life comes. If you are going to be continuing that ESU support, so Todd and I have been already working to make sure that our content development team is ready to go with supporting ESU support. So for those of you who have subscribed to that in the past for Windows 7, Server 2008, or even earlier OSs, yes, we will be supporting that for the first 3 years, again, as we did with the previous round. So if you need to have that conversation, let us know, and we can get you the details on that. But that is coming up. So it seems like a long ways away, but we're already in March. So lifecycle for Windows 10 and Windows 11. The next round here that's going to be affected will be coming up in May and June. You can see the dates highlighted there. So 20H2 coming up in May. That'll be the last update there. And then in June, the 21H2 will be coming up for its end of life or end of support. So make sure that you're tracking those and getting ahead of Jay, not only requires it, but at least one person was saying that it was triggering the reboot where they did not have a reboot configured. So a little
Correct.
bit
Yeah,
more.
even if they had it suppressed, Chris, it was actually rebooting after about 15 minutes. So
Yeah. So even if you're suppressing the reboot, the 2012 SSU seems to be triggering, at least in some cases, regardless of whether you were suppressing that or not. So, all right. Next, just letting people know, if you haven't already, you can sign up for our content announcements. This gives you the ability to keep track of many of the other updates that come out in between Patch Tuesdays. We'll cover that towards the end here today, the additional security updates that came out since last month that from other third-party vendors that you want to be aware of. You can also subscribe to those content updates to be able to get those. We do content updates at least twice weekly, if not more, depending on the week and the activities out there. 0 days especially, we will always respond to those very quickly. So on weeks when like a Google Chrome or some other vendor releases a 0 day, we will be responding to those and are probably doing more than 2 a week for those weeks. So, all right, Todd.
all right, let's talk a little bit about what came out this month. As Chris said, it was kind of a light month in terms of, if you look at the bulletins overall. But first off, let's take a look at the third parties. Chris did mention there was a update for Firefox 111, obviously their prime browser. They addressed 13 vulnerabilities this particular release. It's been kind of interesting. The last couple of months, Mozilla's been releasing on Patch Tuesday. It's kind of unusual, but maybe that's going to be their go forward plan here. Anyway, like I said, 13 vulnerabilities this month. One of those is a possibility of remote code execution, as well as some spoofing functionality in there that they're fixing. So if you're using Firefox in your organization, definitely want to make sure you get this one applied. We rated as high. They rated as high. We rated it as a critical release because we have the three categories that we use. They also released Firefox ESR, their long-term service branch, if you want to think of it that way, and 102.9 as well. 6 vulnerabilities this month. Those 6 do overlap with the 13 that were seen in the previous update for Firefox 111. No known issues with either of those upgrades. Getting into the Microsoft updates, did see quite a bit of few vulnerabilities addressed in Windows 11 and Windows 10 this month. Starting off with Windows 11, 53 vulnerabilities fixed. And you can see that they did provide, obviously, updates for both versions that they have in the field, the 21H2 and the 22H2. Chris did talk quite a bit about the 24880 vulnerability being known, exploited, and publicly disclosed. Highlighted that here in red for all of you. And of course, the curl issue as well that they information disclosed, 43552 as well. So be aware of both of those that are out there this month. Couple of carry forward issues, March known issues for Windows 11. Interestingly enough, the original version that they released, 21H2, they are not flagging anything as any known issues in there. But in the updated version, you'll see that there is an issue around provisioning. If any of you see my forecast article that I write, I did talk a little bit about this. They have been working on this particular problem quite a bit. They've had a couple of interim releases that have addressed parts of this. I thought maybe this one would go away this month because they seem to have solved it in their preview version, but apparently not. They're still carrying this one forward for quite a while as a known issue. So if you are doing provisioning, using the provisioning functionality, there are some issues with their out-of-the-box experience. This slow copy issue has been around since they introduced this new update. Similarly, there was this issue that was introduced around downloading Server 22 from WSS servers, the updates there, so be aware of that one. That one was carried forward from last month. And then something new that was introduced this month, I call it the app fail here, has to do with when you do the update, there are some third-party UI customization apps that might not start up for you. And particularly, Microsoft called out Explorer, Patcher, and the Start All Back applications. It's kind of interesting the way Microsoft worded this. They said that they're using some unexpected functionality in the operating system, and that when you do the update this month, it gets broken. So they must be doing some hidden manipulation there in the operating system. Microsoft says they are investigating. They don't think it's their problem. Obviously, they'll never say that, but they said they might provide some additional information in the future if you are using these particular applications. So, like I said, this particular issue was introduced this month with the latest Windows 11 update. Windows 10, they introduced one more, or fixed one more vulnerability, 54 vulnerabilities this month. Again, the same two known exploited and the other publicly disclosed. Of course, lots of updates across all of Windows 10 as usual. Known issues. This one they've been carrying forward for quite a while, has to do with this issue of cluster network drivers not starting afterwards. The service will start up after about 20 minutes, so it is kind of self-correcting, but just kind of be aware of this one. It's been around for a long time. One thing also that was introduced this month in Server 2022, there is an issue around running VMs in ESXi. Be aware of this one. And it only seems to be affected with Windows Server 2022 as far as you have to have the secure boot enabled. So kind of be aware of this one as well. We had the monthly roll-up for Server 2012 this month, as expected. They addressed 44 vulnerabilities this month, quite a few as well. I did look through the release notes in the KB article and wanted to point out the fact in here that this update implements the final phase of the DCOM hardening that they've been describing in this KB article, 5004-442. So we've been talking about that for 3 years now. Anyway, the final phase is finally here. Basically, under this phase, they remove the ability to make changes through the registry. So kind of be aware of that one. If you've been tweaking the registry in the past to override some of the security functionality, you can no longer do that. Again, this is the monthly roll-up for Server 2012. Known issues, there is this domain join issue they've had for a long, long time. So we're still carrying this forward. It exists in both the monthly roll-up as well as the security-only update. Security-only update for 2012, same 44 vulnerabilities that were introduced. Again, I mention it every month, but just for those of you who may be new, the security-only updates for the older operating systems only address these particular 44 vulnerabilities. They do this from Microsoft releases it with both the monthly roll-up, which includes everything going back to October of 2016, whereas the security-only updates include just those vulnerabilities for this month. They do it for the ability to do some, I guess, apply less fixes to a system for those systems that are running applications that may not be very stable. So you can do just the security-only updates and see how they impact those systems. We do get the monthly roll-up for 2012 R2. One thing to note here, in addition to this is the final phase of the DCOM hardening, you'll notice that the domain join issue is not on this one. They specifically and explicitly called out the fact that they have it fixed for the 2012 R2 release. So this is the first month that this particular known issue has been carried forward. So they finally have that fixed on this particular operating system. They did say that the domain join issue on Server 2012, they are probably not going to fix because it's so close to end of life. So anyway, be aware of that. They addressed 45 vulnerabilities this month in the monthly roll-up. Same 45 vulnerabilities in the security-only update for Server 2012 R2. Also note on the bottom, Windows 8.1, which is usually associated with Server 2012 R2, did reach end of support in January, no longer supported by Microsoft. Moving on to the Office applications, this is the click-to-run version. Security updates for Microsoft 365, the Office 2019, and the Long-Term Service Channel 2021 releases. They did address 3 vulnerabilities. Most importantly, as Chris called out, the vulnerability in Outlook, which is the 2023 23397 that we talked about earlier, as being known exploited. So this is one that you definitely want to get updated as soon as possible. In the standard Office suite, they did quite a few releases this month. They had standalone releases around Excel. They had standalone release, obviously, around Outlook specifically, but of course the Office suites as well. They did address 6 different vulnerabilities, and again, the known 23397 is the known exploited that they fixed this month. So if you are running your on-premise applications on dedicated servers, you want to make sure that you get this set of Office applications updated as soon as possible. One final update on SharePoint Server, just rated important. It's the only important one this month. All the others were rated as critical because of the nature of the vulnerabilities involved. There was just one single vulnerability addressed this month, 23395, which was just rated as important. So not as critical this month to get SharePoint Server updated, but of course you should include it in your normal patch cycle as usual. So it's kind of a light set of updates this month. I don't have much else to share with you on anything there. There were a couple of questions on Internet Explorer. I did drop in the chat responding to one person's question about the fact that they didn't really appear to change the nature of when you are using Microsoft Edge to disable Internet 11. It seems that the functionality that they had in place or that they added in February, which we talked briefly about, I included the link to the Microsoft article that talks about what they're doing there right now. Essentially, if you go in and disable the IE11 in Edge, it will remove the icons from the desktop and a few other things. So that may be why I saw there were a couple of comments about sealing a sad face in Edge for PDFs and things like that. It may be that interaction between what Microsoft is doing with Edge and IE at this point. I don't know. I haven't seen really any other comments on that, but it doesn't seem that Microsoft has changed the way it's making changes to IE11 currently. So that's about as much as I have on that right now.
There was an article in February of 23, so last month, regarding people who were having some problems with Microsoft Edge as the default PDF viewer. I did share that link with the original poster of that article, but let me...
Okay.
Let's see, where was that question? I can try to resubmit it to everyone if anybody else has that issue. But basically going in and switching it, like resetting it up as the default is one of the first steps that it recommends, but there's a couple of other things to try in there. Okay, here it is. I'm going to see if I can edit that and switch it over to send to all. If you are also running into issues with that PDF as the default, check that link. That was the best one I could find. That's the most recent. It looks like this has happened a few times over the last 18 months. I saw some posts from early 21, mid 21, and this one that was updated just in February. So it looks like, yes, some people are having this. If you are, there's a couple of solutions that you can try in that article. Another one that came up was, so there's those of you who need to get rid of IE11. There's also some of you that might still have to keep IE11 for some reason. Actually, I had a writer from SC Magazine reach out to ask some questions about that in general. That article posted maybe last week or 2 weeks ago now. I can't remember. It's all blurring together. But one of the things that he wanted to find out was more about a new vendor that just kind of launched called Island. So island.io, if you want to check this out. That's island.io. They're basically calling themselves the enterprise browser. There's technologies that have been similar to this in the past. If you're familiar with Bromium, there's been a couple of others that do like secure email, secure browsing, hardened browsing kind of experiences. That's the type of technology this is. What it's trying to do is not to fix the insecure nature of those technologies, but IE11, other technologies like Silverlight and other pieces that have been slowly end of life over the last few years here, if you still have to run those for some reason, what their experience is say your user is in Google Chrome and they're, doing their normal thing, and then they want to switch over to this legacy application that's web-based and requires some of those things. At that point, it forces the experience over to the Island browser, and that basically containerizes the experience. So you can only get to that app through that browser. If you try to get to it through other things, it grabs that and it pushes you over into the Island browser. you can lock down a variety of other things, like the ability to copy, paste, download things. Like you got a lot of control over that experience. But what it's doing is basically just containing that experience so that it's securing or wrapping that in a more secure layer. It doesn't completely absolve you from risk on that. You'll definitely have to keep up with island.io to make sure that if they have any vulnerabilities or things coming up, like now you're switching over to Silverlight being a vulnerable component over to, hey, Silverlight's now wrapped in this cocoon of protection. If there's a sandbox escape or some other vulnerability that comes up in island.io's browser, then you've got a concern there. So it doesn't completely get you away from security risks, but it shifts it over to a much more controlled way of continuing that forward. So that's an alternative. Can't say that we can recommend or say that this is going to do everything you need, but if you are struggling to find a way to secure some of those experiences or be able to do that, they are still running compatibility modes for IE11 and for a variety of other use cases like that. So just a heads up there on the IE11 topic. See, did we get through? Looks like we've got most of the other questions. Todd, there's somebody asking for a link to your forecast article.
Yeah, it's on HelpNet Security. I can't really pass URLs very well. They seem to break. If you just Google forecast and my name on HelpNet, it'll show up.
Okay, between the Patch Tuesdays. So as I mentioned before, we talk about this part towards the end each month, talking about what are all of the other security updates that just came out to make sure that people are staying on top of all the different updates that are coming out. This month, Chrome and Node.js are kind of stealing the show with the lineup there. Those are the ones that were confirmed reporting CVEs. So on the Google Chrome side, they had 2 releases that came out since last Patch Tuesday. The first one resolved 8 vulnerabilities. The second one resolved 24 vulnerabilities. So a total of 32. Yes, simple math escaping me today. 32 vulnerabilities resolved between those. So between that and Firefox's release yesterday, make sure your browsers are all up to date to get those plugged. Node.js, for anybody using Node.js, they did have some additional updates coming out, depending on which version you're on. They're, the current, latest branch, that's their kind of more aggressive branch. They resolved 3 vulnerabilities. Their long-term service lower branch, 5. Long-term service upper branch resolved 5. It's got a lower branch and upper branch. The maintenance branch, they've got a lot of branches. But depending on which one you're on, they resolve some vulnerabilities. So if you're running Node.js, you probably got an update to apply there. And then there were a bunch of non-security updates. Now, we do track those. I'll go back a couple slides here. We talk about security updates with CVEs and security updates without CVEs. Because of the cumulative nature of these applications, state is always the question. What state is your environment in? If you're, running the latest version and this new one came out that did not include new CVEs, then you're good. But if your environment had anybody the FileZilla client updated twice this last month, if you were up to date before those 2 came out, then no new security changes are in place for yours. But if any of your systems are 3, 4, or more versions out of date, you could have security vulnerabilities included in that as well. So we take more of a defense in-depth approach. All of these applications did release updates. They did not specifically resolve any new CVEs, but depending on what version is currently on systems, they could be resolving some in previous versions. So getting the latest up to date. In the software world, it's always good to keep software up to date. Consider any piece of software as having a shelf life. The longer it sits, the more chances it has to expire. And by expire, meaning, something security related comes up. So keeping up with software updates from a general perspective is ideal. But these are the ones that specifically had new CVEs relating to them. All right.
The other thing to note, Chris, is that some vendors tend not to report CVE address.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure that's a good idea, but be that as it may, some of them do not report what CVEs are fixing, just calling them out as a security update.
Right. Yeah. So you're not going to see a lot of CVEs from like paint.net. The only time they've reported CVEs is when something really bad tends to happen. Vendors like Wireshark do a pretty good job of keeping CVEs identified in anything that they're confirmed resolving. But even then, if it's something that they fixed internally and they never opened a CVE on it, there's a chance that there's some security fixes that could be in there that just aren't being reported at that level. So yeah, it's always best to keep moving forward on software updates when possible. So Dinesh, there's no article relating to those SSU reboot issues that we were hearing about. That was a thread on patchmanagement.org. If you're not already a subscriber to patchmanagement.org, that is one of the top places that Todd and I will keep an eye out for to identify what's going on issue-wise. I'm going to share that link for you here, and for any others that have not already gone there. It's something that if you read down to the fine print, it's actually was originally created by Shavlik Technologies, the company that I originally came from, and we've been hosting it and keeping it active for years. It is, we do a minimal level of interaction there. We created this as an ecosystem for administrators like yourselves to have these conversations. We try to keep it very vendor agnostic. Our Susan Bradley is one of our top moderators for that. She's not an Ivanti employee. Some of you may know her. She is now, in the past couple of years here now, slowly taken over kind of a more active role on Ask Woody, if you're familiar with that site. She's one of the very strong proponents for keeping people sharing information about what's going on, security-related issues, update-related issues, known issues, all that kind of stuff. It's all for open discussion out there. They tend to try to keep it to patch-related conversations. If it drifts off of that, one of the moderators might come in and start slapping hands a little bit, but they tend to keep it on topic. A lot of good information comes out of there. So Dinesh, that's where we were seeing those reports from, and it was more than a few. So you can go and see, if you go to that patchmanagement.org site, you can go out there and see the recent threads. You'll find it out there pretty quickly. It's in the top probably 5 or 6 topics that just got discussed recently. Do we provide content notifications for iOS, iPadOS updates? So MDM versus client-based platforms, we do a lot more focus on the client-based because that's where traditional patch management lives. When Apple updates, they tend to have a lot of the OS updates also affect the iOS, iPadOS side as well, Matthew. That's not always 100% consistent, but when you see a macOS update, assume that there is likely an iOS and iPadOS update. Our MDM product gives you visibility into knowing when there's OS updates for the mobile devices, but we're actually working on a feature that will give us the ability to do a more active kind of pushing of updates to those platforms as well. Apple and Android have gotten better about opening up capabilities like that to enterprise level vendors like us. So expect that in the near future here from Ivanti MDM. But yeah, that's the content notifications that I was mentioning before. That's focused on the macOS and third-party apps for it. But whenever we do macOS updates, assume that you can find the corresponding iOS and iPad OS updates as well. They typically release in fairly close proximity to each other. So, all right. Did we get to all other questions? We've got a few new ones. Okay, Joseph was saying he's tried to join patchmanagement.org but never got let in. It is just a Google group. So Joseph, typically what happens there is most of the time I've seen people struggle with that. It's your organization has rules about allowing you in by Google groups. If that's the case, you might have to try to use a personal email address. If you were trying to do a personal email address and it didn't allow you to do that, could be something else. You can follow up with me directly, and I'll see if I can help get one of our moderators to assist in getting you in there. So reach out to me, and we can see if we can get you sorted. But yeah, typically that's what we tend to see. Okay, Todd, any other questions that we haven't gotten to?
Have you heard of any radius or NPS issues since the February 2023 patches? From Josh.
I don't recall seeing anything regarding
I don't either,
radius or NPS.
There were some questions here and there, Chris, about specifically to Ivanti, when do we drop content based on Patch Tuesday, specifically around Office? And I'll make a quick comment on that. A lot of the Office 365 and other patches come out later in the day on Patch Tuesday. So even though Microsoft does the notification and the security updates page information at noon Central Time for us, a lot of times the actual binaries don't show up until later in the day. As a result, usually the Office stuff we will release the day after Patch Tuesday, because we work late getting the OS updates and all that kind of stuff cranked out. And then if we get to the Office stuff, it can show up the same day. But sometimes, and most days, most Patch Tuesdays, it shows up the day after.
Hey, Todd, there was a question about Node.js from Chris. And my first inkling is to think of this. Basically, Node.js, Corretto, any of those are Java alternatives. I think they would behave pretty much like the old JRE updates for like Java 8. If, assume that, Java's going to be running or Node.js will be running, do you know if we have any content actions, dependent actions in for Node.js or any of the others like we do for Java, or might they have to kill the Node.js service to get it to update properly or anything?
I don't know offhand. I would have to look into that. I'm not sure.
Long
maybe
or Richard,
maybe they could
if
comment
you
on that one.
guys are on there, that one is in the PM bucket right now under Q&A. Question number 75 that came in. I don't know if you guys have an answer on that. Otherwise, we could try to follow up on that afterwards, Chris. My initial feel on this is that, again, it's a Java runtime alternative. So assume the same challenges as JRE would occur. It's going to be running in use, even if the app might not be actively being used by the user at that time. So you may need to do things like kill the Node.js application where it might fail or something like that. For Java, we do some dependent actions to clean that up and do a side-by-side install to get that cleaned up. But if Long or Richard can chime in on that one, we may be able to confirm if we're doing something similar there with Node.js. So we'll wait and see if we can get an answer on that for you. I don't see any other questions right now. All right. Thank you, everyone. We are just a minute over on our time here today. We do appreciate many of you hanging on for quite a while with us to get a lot of interesting questions answered there. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again in April.